Welcome to We Got Balls, real, raw, masculine sex talk with Chris Inman and Scott Cohn. Chris and Scott both work with men who want to leave their unwanted sexual struggles in the past. They are willing to do whatever it takes to help men get curious about what drives their compulsive sexual behavior. With that said, here we go.
Hey guys, welcome back to We Got Balls, and today we've got a meaty episode, guys. I tell you what, whenever we're talking about this topic, everybody gets excited. I mean, everybody gets excited. It's a very, very firm and engorging topic. And
well,
yes, I'm talking, what?
It's penetrating is what it is.
It is penetrating, yes. I think probably more penetrating than engorging, but it can be both. And yes, I'm talking about boners, talking about erections. I'm talking about hard-ons. I'm talking about woodies. Talking about getting lumber. Talking about that morning wood.
The wobbly warhead.
What?
The wobbly warhead.
The wobbly warhead. Now, here we go. So
that's going back to the 70s.
Yeah, see, that's before my time.
Yeah.
But guys, everybody wants to have confidence in their boner. And that's a big symbol, and we'll get into some of the ins and outs of that and how that kind of plays out in, everything's an innuendo, dude.
Oh,
just Freud would be so proud of us. I mean, Freud is like so excited that we're doing this podcast.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but in this episode, everything's a boner. So
everything is a boner. So, if you're interested, when this episode drops, you're going to get to see a whole lot of boner jokes on our TikTok page. So if you're not on TikTok, wegotballs.pod is the TikTok page. Go check it out. Go search us, go follow us. We would love to share with you our best boner jokes and boner videos, because I'm going to tell you what, and Scott, you know this, the fascination with the boner starts young. There's a lot of little kids that love to imitate what it's like to be a masculine man because they're curious about their bodies. So when you think about the meaning of boners and what it takes us to, tell me what you're thinking about, Scott.
Well, now what immediately came to mind was the story of my oldest son when he was 5.
There you go.
He was in the shower. I was eating breakfast with my daughters. It was a Saturday morning. He was in the shower, and apparently he discovered that soaping up his body led to a strange response in his male member. And so we look up, and he's standing in the doorway, so with his hands on his hips, dripping naked, and says from the door, and we're sitting about 15 feet away, he goes, "I'll have you know, while I was in the shower, my penis got about as big as from here to the refrigerator."
Yes. Yes.
And my daughters spit their cereal out. They were laughing so hard. And I just simply looked up non-pulse and said, "Well, that's pretty big, son," and went back to eating. So, everybody's, in fact, when you think about erections, the word fascinating comes to mind. And there's actually a very fascinating story about where the word fascinating comes from.
Tell me more.
So in doing the research for this particular episode, and maybe 2 episodes, it depends on how long we go today, but I used this just really fascinating book called A Mind of Its Own, The Cultural History of the Penis. And this was published 20 years ago, I guess, but it's just a great tour of history from a cultural perspective of what erections, what the penis means, but a lot of focus on erections. Phalluses is the term for an erect kind of symbolic penis. And the word fascinating goes back to Rome and to the Latin language, where Roman males were given a locket called a bulla that they wore around their neck. And inside that locket was an engraving of an erect penis. And they were given this when they entered puberty, their first ejaculation. And it was a symbolic, so it was called a fascineum, this erect penis.
Yep.
And it was symbolic of their entry into manhood. And that as a Roman male, unlike the Greek males, Roman males were to be penetrators, not to be penetrated, because, the Greeks practiced pederasty. It was part of their cultural symbolism, bringing young men into manhood. And the Romans were completely against being penetrated as a male. You had to do the penetrating. And so this was given to young Roman males as they entered puberty to symbolize you're a man now. And so the word fascinating comes from fascinium. And every time you say something's fascinating, basically you're admitting that something's as intriguing and amazing as an erect penis.
Yeah, it's penetratingly amazing.
Yes. So
Yeah. Well, let's pause there, because I think, since we're going to historical significance, we're going to be talking around the imagery of erection this whole episode, or two episodes, as you referred to. And so, if we're talking about that, I mean, we can go back before the Romans and the Greeks to talk about the significance of the penis, right?
yeah, so let me just kind of set the stage here, because when you talk about erections from a sexual arousal standpoint and fantasy standpoint, which is what our podcast is all about, we go back to those three things that we always talk about. There's the visual cues, visual cued sexual interest. There is the psychological cues, and then there's the narrative or the story cues. And when it comes to erections, it combines all three of those cues into one concept. So
Yes.
you take an erect penis, and male sexual arousal is overt, where female sexual arousal is a little more subtle. It can be hidden. It's not necessarily something you see.
Definitely can't tell that it's there physically. The visual cued sexual interest. I mean, the only thing that happens in sex, I mean, there are a few things like erect nipples and reddening of the pubic region and that kind of stuff.
The labia do swell with blood. They become engorged.
Right.
The Taurus
But
does.
that's not the billboard. The billboard in sex is, dude, what is that? And even I can even remember back when I was in high school making out with my girlfriend, and I'd get an erection where I'm get excited, and she can feel that. I'm not taking my clothes off. She's got taking her clothes off, but she can feel that through my pants. And the old joke is the old gray sweatpants thing for women. You guys can't wear gray sweatpants because you can kind of see, maybe, as they say, a half chub or a quarter chub there. So all that's going on is there's this erection really has a lot of significance in visually stimulating arousal.
Yes. And in fact, I found a fascinating study where they took men and women and they basically created heat maps of what men are sexually aroused by visually and what they're aroused by for touch. And so the genital region in men was highly arousing, both from a visual standpoint when they're looked at by their partner, and when they're touched by their partner. And it wasn't that way for women. It was breasts in women that was visually arousing for them and for their partner. And so this is just kind of how the male body and the mind work together. Is our penises are they're right out front, right? We have outboard motors, and it's obvious when we're sexually aroused. And also there's a big distinction between being sexually aroused and sexual desire, because I can have an erection that is unintentional, unwanted.
Sure.
And it's a response erection to maybe friction in my clothing, or maybe I've had this happen. I fall asleep on an airplane in the mornings, and I'll wake up, halfway into the flight with a raging erection.
Well, and let's get the biology out of the way. As we sleep as men, usually, what is it, 4 to 5 times per night?
5
have
times
erections
per night. Yeah. 30 minutes per erection. So that's a lot of erections in the evening.
And so our bodies are naturally cycling blood in and out of that part to keep it working properly and to keep it healthy. And so, when you talk about erection, there is the physiological piece, which is, I mean, I've actually heard of guys who have erections from doing ab workouts. And so that kind of thing, and there's a number of other things, but in this context, I think we're also saying, what is the meaning of that? Now, sometimes there is no meaning, but many times there is.
Yeah, and so I'm going to go to the narrative cues here, because the really fascinating part about this entire subject is, as you start delving into this, there is so much symbolism, which is part of narrative, part of stories, that's involved with erect penises. And to your point, what you were bringing up is this goes back to pagan cultures and religions. In fact, the earliest record that we have of any kind of human writing goes back to Iraq, Sumeria, the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. And the writing that we have is of the story of a god named Endi, who masturbates, and his ejaculation forms the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And you have these kind of, that's a lot of jizz, but
wow, that's
but that,
man, that's a load. That's a
but
big load.
that is not unusual when you start looking at the mythologies, the god stories of ancient cultures. You find incredible amounts of stories around erect penises of the gods and how the earth came into being through their copulation with a goddess, the earth, or just masturbation. And so it is embedded in culture and deep symbolism. And there's this interesting movement that's kind of come about in the last 20 years called reenchantment, where, from the Enlightenment on, we started de-enchanting the world. Prior to the Enlightenment, everybody believed in the gods or God and the unseen world. And after the Enlightenment comes around, you start to get this very materialistic worldview and philosophy that only material things, only physical things exist.
Right.
And
so let me put a pin on that, because I think it's important. When we started doing this work, you know what we called narrative cues? Embodied myth. So what you're talking about is there are stories, there are themes, there are ideas that can only be told in a fantastical way. And when you bring in, and I'm not against science, love science, we'd learn a ton from science, but when you bring it in a science only methodology, you lose a lot of the human experience and a lot of the context, the color, the flavor, the smell of what it means to be a human being walking through life.
yes. And so what's happened as we come to the beginning of the 21st century, materialism has kind of run its course as a philosophy. And you really see this in kind of the trans movement. So when you can be a biological male but identify as a female on the inside, and we start to, as a culture, accept that I can have a different identity than my physical reality, now we don't have any supporting worldview or philosophy for that. And so there's this real movement that's come about in the last 20 years, which is called reenchantment. And C.S. Lewis has this line in the line, The Witch in the Wardrobe, where he talks about a deep magic that's deeper than the White Witch's magic, the magic that Aslan has. And there's a quality, of course, Aslan is a type of Christ. There's a quality to the deeper realities of the world that goes beyond material things. And that's what I think people are looking for now. So within that giant context of symbolism and reenchanting the world, erections play a huge part in that. And they always have. When you start going back and looking at the mythologies.
Time out. We went from the Enlightenment and materialism to erections. So you're gonna have to put some tethering into this.
Yeah.
So let's talk about for just a second, what do erections mean? When we're talking about narrative and we're talking about the context of life, what are the symbols? I mean, you mentioned earlier, the fascinium is a symbol in the Roman tradition for the man being initiator, the man being the one who penetrates, the man being the one who causes action to happen. So what are some of the other things? So when we see an erection, whether ours or someone else's, what is that bringing up in our bodies, in our humanity?
So the first thing you have to understand is this idea of symbolism is that physical things represent real unseen reality. Okay. So in that regard, then, what does an erect penis mean beyond just I'm sexually aroused?
Yeah.
So you start looking into this culturally, historically, and it's an incredible amount of meaning is embedded in an erect penis. So back to the God stories, they're giving the erect penis the ability to create, to bring new life into existence. And of course, you aren't going to be able to father children without getting an erection in some way.
Right. So this is talking about fertility, productivity, all those kind of ideas, right?
Creativity, right? there's the idea of power. So to the
Mm,
Romans, an erect penis symbolized the power of Rome. And whereas you may have been a private citizen, your genitals were public because there was a direct relationship to the health of the Roman Empire and whether or not Roman males had big penises and were breeding. Sometimes the Roman generals would promote a guy on the size of his penis. Sometimes there were specific benefits and privileges given to Romans who had children, had a lot of children, because it kept the culture alive.
yeah.
And
So and so I don't think we need to stop here, because I think when we're talking about culture, when we're talking about where we are in the world, um, never before has there been a time in human culture that populations have begun to shrink because of nothing other than people deciding to stop procreating, to stop growing. We've got Korea, we've got China, we've got Japan, and a number of the European countries whose populations are shrinking. And now this is not a geopolitical conversation, but I think when we talk about symbolism, there is a design in this in the erect penis that says growth is what is good. Growth is what we need to be aspiring for.
yeah, and creativity,
Yes.
right? And um, and so you've got those elements. You've got power. You've got pleasure. You know, the erect penis brings pleasure to the man's partner while he's getting pleasure himself.
Wow. That's a good combo. I like that. I like that math right there.
Right? I
Yeah.
can do something with my body that brings pleasure, joy, excitement
Yep.
to another person, and the way I do that primarily is by penetrating them. So
Yeah.
there's this idea of, and I think it goes back to this. This is a theological term, perichoresis, the mutual indwelling,
Yep.
which is part of the triune God. We're created, we believe, we're created in the image of a we, not a me. And within that, Jesus says things like, "I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, and I will be in you, and you will be in me." And it's almost this very sexual language in nature when you think about even how Paul says in the New Testament, in Ephesians, that for this reason a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and the two become one flesh. This is a great mystery, brothers, but I'm speaking with reference to Christ and the church. And right there, he's saying intercourse, when the man goes into the woman, symbolizes something bigger than what's happening physically. It's representing Christ being in his bride and his bride being joined to him. Now that's an incredible statement.
It is, but that none of that's possible without this symbolism and this reality of erection, which is, I think, um, Scott, when we're talking about this, maybe some guys, I mean, even I'm sitting here thinking about it, are feeling insecure about where they are, and whether it's because of their age or because of habitual patterns. There's a lot of these things that seem inaccessible. I've talked to many men who see not only penis size, well, it's really erect penis size, right? You know,
Yep,
flaccid penis size. We know there's showers and there are growers. So
that's
there's
right.
people that really keep the same size no matter whether they're flaccid or erect, and then there's people who start very small and get erect. But then when they compare themselves to other people, and especially if they've had, and we'll get to this in a few weeks, experiences of sexual harm where they were compared prematurely, like they were prepubescent and they compared themselves to a post-pubescent boy. Obviously, hormones enlarge the penis size, and so there's this insecurity around this because they don't feel powerful, they don't
Or
feel fertile.
or as happened to me, your abuser mentions the size of your erection to make
Yeah.
you feel complicit in a
Mm,
sexual encounter.
yep.
So now shame gets attached to my own body and my erect penis as a symbol of I'm perverted. I
Right.
wanted this.
So there's insecurity, there's shame, there's
So this gets into the
harm.
whole category of penises are not only powerful, but they can create a lot of harm in a
Yep.
person's life
Yep.
or be the subject of a lot of harm. You can rape a woman or a
Mm,
man with an erect penis, right? You can humiliate somebody and dominate somebody. You can be harmed by others.
mm.
Um, so there's this real tension between things on the generative side, positive, good,
Yep.
blessed, and
Yep.
things that are really dark and cursed and really degrading about the human experience that are all kind of encompassed in erect penises.
Mm,
So I just wrote down a list off the top of my head as I was, kind of digesting a lot of the research I had done on this is what is the symbolic meaning of erection? So this is what
mm.
I came up with. This is Scott's list. First one, I'll kind of explain a little. The first time we see intercourse actually mentioned in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 4. Adam knew Eve.
Yep.
So there's a kind of knowing that takes place when I have an erection and I put it in my wife that is unlike any other knowing, but it's considered knowing.
Yeah, and I think we need to put a pause in that because one of the most intimate and connecting, you talked about two become one flesh, is that initial penetration, both for men and for women. That's kind of like the threshold of desire that people, if I can just, there's a slang phrase, if I can just get it in. I mean, that's the whole point. If I can get an erection, if I can find a willing partner, and if I can begin to have this act of intercourse, this the sexual act, then my hopes and dreams will be fulfilled. But that is, to use the word that you said, that is what it means when we talk about knowing. It's the intimacy of sharing bodies and desires and touch with another person.
Yes, and you can often discern this in a guy's arousal structures and what he watches in porn. I've got a friend where I was asking, tell me where in pornography you experience the greatest arousal. Is it when the guy ejaculates or or the woman has an orgasm? He goes, no, it's when the guy penetrates.
Yes,
And I'm like,
exactly.
interesting. So what does that mean to you? What's the symbolism behind that? That she finally lets me in? Yes. So his
Yep.
experience with women was always pushing back, right?
Yep.
So
Or
for
even better, she welcomes me in. She pulls me in.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So sometimes a guy's arousal temple will be formed around his harm around relationships either with his mom or other women in his life who always felt like they were removed and not wanting him. And so that moment of high arousal is I'm welcomed in. I get
Mm,
to know in a
mm,
way that I can't before.
right.
So we talked about creating, we talked about pleasuring, we just talked about indwelling, we talked about power. I just want to stress that the word power, potency, the opposite of that is impotency.
Impotence. Are we talking about impotence here? Is that the
Yeah,
same word?
yeah,
So the same word for I can't get an erection is the antonym of power, right?
yeah. And
Yep.
the epitome of being powerless is you can't get a hard on.
Let's take that real quick because I think it's really important that we take some time to sit with it because in my work and in the things that I've talked around with men, impotence is a really core motivator for why you actually want to heal your sexual struggles, whether that's physical impotency or feeling impotent relationally or feeling impotent vocationally, financially, whatever it is. If you're looking for that power, that success, that drive, a lot of that comes in dealing with this symbol of a boner.
For sure. And there you go back culturally to the Romans giving their sons. It was a symbol of the Roman power to have an erect penis
Yeah,
around a young guy's neck.
that's their identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am my penis. Um,
Yes.
there's it's a symbol of tenderness, right?
Mm.
You can make love very tenderly. It can be touched tenderly. It's very sensitive. When we get an erection, the sensitivity in our penis skyrockets, particularly in the glands. And
Yep.
so that tenderness and arousal kind of being linked together.
Oh, funny story. I don't know where this was. It was some sketch comedy show, but there was a guy who came in, older man who came in from the nursing home, and he had taken 8 Viagra. And they were trying to, relieve the pressure. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And finally, in the sketch, it didn't show it on screen. In the sketch, it was so engorged that it just popped, and he died. He had a heart attack.
Oh my
God! So that's, there's nothing more tender than an erect penis on a man's body. Very, very powerful, but also very vulnerable.
Yes. Noticeable. Attention getting.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Rest.
Say more about that.
How does a boner represent rest?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can't get an erection unless your parasympathetic nervous system is at rest. When you're in a sympathetic response of fight, flight, freeze, there's a very narrow window when you can get erect. Otherwise, you can't.
Okay. So when you're stressed, when you're feeling extreme anxiety, when you're feeling like your life is being threatened, and there is no safety, now
it's physiologically impossible to get an erection in most instances.
Well, so we're going to have to contrast that, because I'm thinking about one of our other topics that's on deck, which is public sex. That's not safe. That is risky, and yet that is a turn on for a lot of guys.
So is rape, where rage is kind of the prime motivator, not sexual pleasure.
Yeah.
So you can get an erection when you're enraged, and you can get an erection. I read an account of a guy who would go into battle in Vietnam, and he would get a raging hard-on every time he was in the helicopter flying in to do a sortie.
Okay.
And he was terrified of doing that, but his terror ended up showing up in his penis. This is, again, an unintended boner.
Sure.
So there is a window in which you can get erections, either if the fear or the anger is at a lower level, or it's at a rage or terror level. But normally in between, in that fight flight response, you cannot get it erect. And that is a hardwired response, and it's a survival thing. Because if you go back, let's pretend we're cavemen here, and we're living in a cave, and we're having sex with the missus, and a saber-toothed tiger comes to get us. The guy that could get up and fight the tiger or grab his wife and run from it is the guy who survived. So that survival instinct reflex of the erection going down when you have a certain window of tolerance that caps it and dampens it, allows you to kind of fight or flee in those instances. So we talked about heightened sensitivity. We haven't talked about this, giving. It's giving and receiving.
So, for example, you can't give a blowjob to a flaccid penis. I mean, that's kind of like sucking on a wet noodle. Yeah, that nobody wants to do that. So when you're giving, that's the penetrating. When you're receiving, that's the oral sex. That's the hand job. That's the pleasure from someone else.
From a cultural symbolic standpoint, I can't plant my seed in you unless my plow is firm.
There you go. Well, that's very biblical. It sounds very like what you're writing some scripture.
Very much. And I'll say this: there is a huge link between the secular of my erect penis, which when I use the word secular here, I'm using it kind of the way Martin Luther did. Is there are things that are not directly related to the church or religious world, but that doesn't mean they're not under God's domain. So it's just secular in the sense of it's of the world. It's physical in nature, but there's a link between my erect penis and my connection with God or the gods. So the sacred and the secular get mixed together in this as well. So you can see, just off the top of my head, I could go a lot deeper than this, but there's just a ton of symbolism related to things that really matter in life. And then I didn't really talk about the harm or damage or overpowering or overcoming, but in the book, A Mind of Its Own, he has a whole chapter on just how many in the United States in particular, but just culturally with the West kind of going and exploiting Africa and Africans, how the size of supposedly black men's penises were used as a weapon against them to dehumanize them. And particularly in the United States with lynching and so on, oftentimes they would cut off a man's penis when they lynched him. And
Or if they were to drag them around behind vehicles, they would tie the rope to their penis until it broke off. Yeah.
so again, just that symbol of, if we really want to harm somebody, this is where we're going after them.
Yeah.
And, when you think about the symbolism in pagan cultures, the Greeks would have festivals where they'd carry a 180-foot long erect penis around and parade it in the celebration to Dionysus. They have a god, Pyrapsis, who was the product of Aphrodite and Dionysus mating, and they create a child who's got a permanent, 8-foot erection.
Dude, let's talk about Asherah in the Bible. An Asherah is an erect penis. That's all it is.
Is it Asherah or Baal?
It's Asherah.
Really?
Yeah, Asherah is a statue of a large erect penis that has blood sacrifices, child sacrifices, and fertility rites happening around it.
So there you have that creative and destructive mythology going on in the set, right? And so there is this sense in which we have always intuitively known that an erection is a source of great productivity and great destruction. And I just think that's fascinating that it goes back. Now, when you come to kind of the Bible, then you have God cutting a covenant with Abraham and insisting that Abraham's part of the covenant is to cut off the foreskin of his penis in a way that, and this is how Jewish circumcision was done up until the 1st century, it only exposes the tip of the glands as would be exposed with an erect penis. So God is saying something to the nation of Israel, basically, that you belong to me. And every time you urinate, every time you touch yourself to go to the bathroom, every time you masturbate, every time you have intercourse, I want you to remember that you belong to me. You're different than all these nations around you. Your penis is important, but it's not to be worshiped the way your fellow nations are worshiping it.
Yep.
So
with that, well, I think with that, we're going to put a pin in it, and we'll come back next week, and we'll talk more about insecurity around erection, and we'll get into some deeper pieces to help you address the issues in your story that come up when we talk about these issues of penises and boners. And I mean, we're all dudes. I mean, that's the one thing we all have in common. So, Scott, awesome as always. Go ahead and check out the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TikTok. We got ballspod.com. There's all kind of places that you can check us out. So we'd love to have you join in and follow and share. If you're not sharing this material with your guy friends, what are you doing?
If you're not sharing, you're not caring.
Why are you being such a limp dick, man? Come on, get out there. Let's get it moving. Let's get this stuff done. All right.
Let's go.
So we'll be back again next week. And as always, it's great to be on We Got Balls. And so do you.
And that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, we got balls and so do you. It's just what it is.
We got balls and so do you.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to go. Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris at pornfreemasculinity.com and with Scott at successfulmen.com.